Welcome to the Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Drugs. There's no problem that a little coke and pop rocks can't solve. Let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to the Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Vault-Tec. Make your next home your forever home with Vault-Tec. Welcome everyone to the Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers scattered about the country. I'm a writer, director, and one-man band as well. I have my own production company. I'm also a creative director on an immersive technology company. So we do a lot of VR, AR, filmmaking, storytelling of all kinds. Sometimes it's like tours. Hey, what about a tour through a factory? Well, we do that. Or how about a dramatic 45-minute story about someone who has a schizophrenic break and then goes into a psychiatric ward? We do that too. All over the map. Todd's a musician. He's been singer, frontman in a number of bands, as well as he's a full-time producer, an actor. We're both voiceover actors. All kinds of things. We use all of that experience in front of, behind the camera, as a method of analyzing and looking at films to figure out what can we learn about filmmaking, and do we even like this movie? Do we even like movies? Yes, the answer to that is certainly we do. But yeah, all of that to say, I think we should dive right in. I have a feeling there's a lot to discuss here, man. What are we talking about today?
Well, first off, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. It is Father's Day when we're recording this, so yeah.
And happy Father's Day to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate that. So today we are covering Godzilla Minus One, which at this time of recording is streaming on Netflix. So if you haven't seen this film, please pause the episode, go watch it. We're going to spoil a bunch of stuff. Spoiler, there's a monster in this movie.
Big lizard. Yes. We'll cover a handful of things. We'll look at some of the cinematography. There's a shot in here that I really liked, revealing scale, which is a tricky thing when you're dealing with men and monsters, as well as some of the story and writing. We'll talk about Godzilla the metaphor, probably look at some of the music and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. Post-war Japan is at its lowest point when a new crisis emerges in the form of a giant monster baptized in the horrific power of the atomic bomb. I'm gonna butcher all of these names. Okay, here we go. But I'm sorry in advance. Directed by Takashi Yamazaki, screenplay by Takashi Yamazaki, cinematography by Kôzô Shibasaki. It's featuring Ryunosuke Kamiki as Koichi Shikishima, Minami Hamabe as Noriko, Munetaka Aoki as Tachibana, Hidetaka. I'm sorry.
You're
Hidetaka
crushing it, man.
Yoshioka as Noda, aka Doc.
Well done. And
Head on.
actually, no clips
Aneurysm.
today.
God. I used 100% of my brain. That was 100% of. I'm not even kidding. It's like learning to play a Dave Matthews song and sing at the same time. Both sides of my brain were working.
Where was I just now?
In fact, I could feel the right side of my brain screaming at the left side, and the left side screaming at my right. Sorry about that.
Oh, well done, man. No clip today because I'm the only one that speaks full, fluent Japanese growing up as a young boy in the streets of Tokyo.
My son is learning Japanese right now. He has Duolingo. He wanted to learn Japanese, so I was like, okay.
I started playing with that as well, so maybe he'll learn much faster than I. But maybe we'll work on it. Nice, dude. So Godzilla. It's just a monster movie, yeah? It's a movie about a big monster thing, crawls out of the sea, explosions, and that's it. Like, show me the explosions and the destruction, and that's all this is, yeah? It's a simple movie. What did you think?
Yeah, pretty sure there's nothing else that happened in this film. No, let me put this away because I actually have notes on this movie because I went and saw it in the theater, and when it originally came out, and loved it, and so I was curious, if I still love it, seeing it a second time. And the answer is yes, unabashedly yes. This is my favorite Godzilla film. It's so good, and it's good not just because the CGI is otherworldly. I mean, it's Jurassic Park level quality, which, by the way, we have yet to return to in many cases. I mean, the special effects and CGI in Jurassic Park is fantastic, and this is better than that. This is fantastic. So a couple of things I wanted to point out. The first thing is the CGI. It's amazing. I really feel like I'm there whenever something crazy is happening. The lighting is amazing on Godzilla himself, which I think that's where we lose CGI a lot is in the lighting, usually not in the quality of the computer generation. It's usually in the lighting of the computer generation in a lot of ways. And I feel like there's just so many bumps and rivets and like little divots and stuff in this creature that they really leaned into the hard shadows on the animal, and it pays off in spades. You absolutely feel like you're there because of the way the lighting falls on the animal. And the sound is mind-blowing. Whoever the sound designer is on this film deserves an Oscar, more than almost any other film that I've maybe ever seen. It's just it's so huge. And if you watch it in headphones, or if you're not able to see it in a theater and you watch it in headphones, you're like in it, especially when Godzilla shoots his ray. Yeah. The first time he shoots it, when he's in the city and we see that atomic explosion happen, there's that moment of silence that happens right before the explosion happens, and the hair stands on end, not necessarily because of the giant sound that comes after, but because of the silence before it. It's so effective. It's so great. So that's all amazing. But really what makes this movie for me so good, and I think you're probably going to say the same thing, is the story, right? Is we usually in Godzilla films, there's not as much of a individual story on a specific character for a specific reason. And this is Godzilla in the wake of a war not just a physical actual war, but an internal war that our main protagonist is having with himself. They're constantly placed in positions of impossibility, which we love, right? Where they're on the boat in the water and Godzilla's coming at them, and you're thinking, how could they ever get away? But something happens, and then something else happens, and then they get away. The stakes are gigantic. You don't know who's safe. The fact that we see Godzilla basically as a teenager at the beginning, where he's big, but he's not Godzilla big. And you're sitting and you're thinking, what? I remember thinking in the theater, I thought he was bigger, and they addressed that, because it's the bomb had just happened. Basically, it wasn't that long after. And so we needed time for this thing to become what it was. So we see the impetus of it. We kind of understand where he came from, and then we give him time to grow into what Godzilla actually becomes. I love, probably the biggest thing that I love about it is that these no-name mechanics at the beginning, their deaths are the story, right? We don't know who they are. They're just these random guys who are mechanics on this island. That's like a safety landing place to fix your plane and then you take off and you go back to war. And they die because of our, if you want to call him hero, who's an anti-hero because he's, especially in that culture, like he's a coward. He's supposed to be a kamikaze pilot and he was chickened out. And now not only did he chicken out and he feels bad about that, he ends up, he feels like and I don't think this, but he ends up feeling like he got them killed because he didn't pull the trigger and shoot at Godzilla. So their deaths are what drive this whole thing. He feels like he can't live again. And we're just in this war with him because of this, but we don't know, like they're just no-name guys. Right. And I always have this thing in films where people just die and it's just whatever. And then we just leave and they're dead. But those people who die in these films, they have stories, they have lives, they have families, they have maybe wives, all of that. And they kind of address that in this film. We don't know all their names necessarily, but it doesn't matter because this guy is carrying them with him. And so we're carrying them with him, but we don't know anything about them. And it's very like fulfilling for me as a lover of film. So anyway, I'll stop there, but that's probably the main reason why I love it is that I love the story of the girl that he meets and the baby and taking care of them when they're not quote unquote his family, but he's like loves them like they are. And so they become his family. And the notes that it gives of like, you don't have to sacrifice yourself in order to win, at the end. He could have just flown into the plane, but of course, why not eject if you can? Of course, there's no glory in killing yourself when that might not be necessary. Whereas in this time of the 40s or whenever it was, I forget, I guess, World War II, is that when it's set? Yeah. So in the 40s, in this time, that was what you did. You sacrificed your life, and there was glory in that. There is no glory in that. There's really not. And if you have to, there is, but if you don't have to, there's not. And so they call that out. And I think it's wonderful that towards the end, they bring back the main engineer, and he wants this main engineer to help him defeat Godzilla. Nobody else, this guy. And he fights for that and he gets it. And I love how he gets it. He antagonizes him by telling him that it was his fault or that it wasn't his fault or whatever it was. He antagonizes him to come out of hiding. Of course, why not? Anyway, and I thought how they tried to kill Godzilla by sinking him and then raising him, brilliant. So yes, fantastic. I'll stop talking for a second.
And that's a large part of the genius of this film is setting it in 1945 and 46 and ultimately in 47 is when the final sequence happens, is you have Godzilla, when we've seen Godzilla being taken on by modern forces and like destroying modern jets and bombs and whatever, like how much more overpowering is it to set a Godzilla against people from 80 years ago? Like that's so much more terrifying because we know our weapons today can't defeat them. What are they going to do in a wooden boat? And that invokes the whole idea of what could they possibly do against Godzilla? And whenever they start invoking like science and like that is so much more satisfying, especially because they wrap this first and foremost in a story. It's never about the explosions. It's never about the visual effects. Like those are all there to support a much more important story that we're going to connect with as an audience. And that is what pulled me in. I kept hearing people say, man, Godzilla Minus One. And I was just building this like thrum of people, saying, you got to go see it. And like, why? I'm like, okay, fine. I'll go sit down and watch a stupid Godzilla movie. And I'll be honest, I pretty much watch them all anyway. Yeah. But, I do it with a full eye roll and a big bag of popcorn because the popcorn is going to be what I enjoy most about that entire experience. Yeah. And yet from the outset, they just pull you in with I love that opening shot of, it's not even the plane that you're watching. You're watching a bomb fly into an island and land. And it's then you reveal there's a pilot of this bomb attached to this plane. And it's getting to some really deep-seated stuff that I think has global implications, but probably has a lot more meaning, locally in Japan for sure. And what is this, a $15 to $18 million movie? Like, I could see along the way where they trimmed and, budget here and there. Like, okay, like, she falls into the water when, she's dangling loose in the what is that, a train?
The train?
Yeah. And then they drop the train car behind her and it lands. And before, like, you can see a wave of water that would be naturally caused from a massive object like that, we cut out. Like, okay, let's not wait around for this big wave of water to hit her, because we didn't have the manpower or mechanics to actually create that wave in real, and we're not going to spend the crazy amount of budget that's going to take to like recreate all that in post. We'll just cut around it. We don't need to see it. We've made our point. And there's a handful of other little moments like that where there's details that they're not doing because they don't need to. They got the big details right. You know what? That's enough. Let's cut out. Let's not even worry about that stuff. Because at the heart of this thing anyway, it's not about Godzilla. It's about everyone else. It's about the humans. And that's where all these other Godzilla movies go wrong, is making it about Godzilla. And some of them do make an effort to make it about the people. But they just fail because they don't really know how to frame Godzilla in the middle of these stories of these people. And here I feel like Godzilla is playing such a much bigger metaphoric impact, play with what these people are experiencing. And it's so much better because now Godzilla is not just a metaphor, but it's also an opportunity to let these characters, interact with their own demons in some way or another. And we'll dive into that here in a minute. But for me, walking out of this movie, I was like, I don't know how they did that. No one does that with monster movies anymore, let alone a Godzilla film that's become just cannon fodder for box office receipts. And they just decided, not only are we going to tell a story, a human story, a personal story, we're also going to do it without any money whatsoever. Like, who does that? And then, if that's all not enough, we're going to make it a period piece, which is the nightmare of nightmares when it comes to budget. Like, no one wants to tell a $3 million movie that takes place all across Tokyo with all these wartime era, devices, ships and planes doing crazy stuff. We're going to do all of that, and we're going to do it in budget. Like, what? That's outrageous. And this guy, I think, is probably having just gobs of money thrown at him now. Like, he did the impossible. And yeah, it just crushed it. I was just floored because the emotional heartbeat going through this thing is absolutely what carries it. And so anytime Godzilla shows up, you're not like hoping for him to show up, which is what you're hoping for in every other Godzilla movie. You're okay, but when is Godzilla getting here? But now you're like, please don't show up. Yeah, I don't want you to wreck these lives. Oh. And so whenever he does show up, exactly what you said, the stakes are huge because he's going to destroy people that we care about and that we're rooting for. Oh, man. What the hell? It's just a really impressive tool to tell a really human story. Yeah, I was a huge fan. Like, it just really surprised me in all the ways that you want to be surprised as a moviegoer. It's also really satisfying because some of these things I get frustrated, and even the stories that I want to tell, like, I'm putting women as my protagonists because it's so much easier to emotionally engage with a woman on screen because as a society, I don't feel like we allow men the latitude to be emotional, to have these emotional story beats and to be vulnerable. And here is a story. And because it probably helps that it's a guy, addressing a topic I don't know that I've seen addressed. Like, there's probably been a few stories here and there that address something that even as a kid, I was really familiar with the idea of a kamikaze pilot, because it was just such a wild concept for an American to think about, that my brother and me would, talk about it all the time and use it in our own, 6-year-old stories that we were telling outside running around. Like, using that probably helps to, allow a male on screen to be very vulnerable emotionally. And that's so cool. We just don't get a lot of those kind of stories that allow guys to be that emotionally vulnerable. And then on top of that, I think foreign films, especially like Asian cinema, we just, as an Americans, we see them overact and it looks fine. Like, if we were to do this in English, watching an American do some of these performances, we're like, that's cheesy. Stop it, bro. Reel it in. But for some reason, because they're speaking Japanese, and they're being loud and big and emotional, it makes sense. I don't know if that's because culturally we just aren't familiar, or because we assume that is, I don't know. I don't know why it works for Asian cinema to get away with some of this stuff. As an American, that would pull me out otherwise, but it does. And then the extra layer on top of that, I think, is subtitled films make you lean in so much more than English films, watching a native language film, because now you cannot look away. You have to stay engaged with the film, or else you're going to lose a bit of story. Like,
and by the
dialogue,
way, just to tell anybody who's listening, if you're going to watch this on Netflix, you have to set it to original, because it will probably default to like English without subtitles. So set it to the original Japanese with English subtitles, because that's what it did to me. It like defaulted to that, and I was like, "Oh, nope, I want the original."
Not on my watch.
Yeah,
yeah, that's a huge difference too. Like, allowing the actors to show their original emotion in their voice. Yeah, that's huge for the emotion in this film, right? Like, otherwise I don't know, there's a cartoonish element that starts to take place.
I didn't realize that. So, like, when I first watched Squid Game, I watched the first 3 episodes where it was English overdubbed, and I was like, oh gosh, this is so, why does everyone like this? And then Scott told me about that, and I was like, what? Oh my gosh. And I went in and turned on original. It's like, oh yes, subtitles. Thank you. Dear God. This is so much better. It changes everything. It's like turning off the motion thing on HD TVs. It's just, changes everything. So.
Oh, yeah. So for all those reasons, man, I was 100% pulled into the emotion, which is the last, and maybe that's also the extra, secret punch, is they catch you off guard. You don't go into this movie, because no one told me that it was going to be an emotional ride. Everyone would just kind of said, just go watch it, and you'll see.
Yeah.
And so walking to the theater, I was just like, all right, okay. And then just one scene at a time, it slowly reels you in before it just cocks back one big fist and uppercuts you like Godzilla.
If you think about it, like, think about all the Godzilla posters that you've seen, or all the movies that are about Godzilla, but like you just see like a still or something. It's always of the animal. It's always of the creature. But this one is not. This one is of her through the glass, looking out from the train, and you see Godzilla in the reflection, but it's of her. That's the poster. That's like the main image. When I see Godzilla Minus One, I see a picture of her, with big eyes, like in awe, seeing Godzilla for the first time. And that's it. It's not of the monster. It's of her. And like, that should tell you a little, like, they thought of all of these things. This was all intentional. This wasn't like, we're going to pull the wool over your eyes and make you think this is about an animal. No, this is about people, and about recovery, and about the destruction, the eventual destruction, and about the rebuilding, and about the, recovery, not just of this animal, but of war, of destruction, And the scene where she saves him, the explosion, the first explosion that I talked about earlier, where Godzilla shoots which is unbelievable. She pushes him into the alley and then gets blown back, and then the vacuum sucks everything back in. That feels so real. Normally when an explosion happens, it's just outward, you know. We don't take into account the fact that, it's pushing all the air out, so the air has to refill that area. And so that's why all of that debris gets sucked back in. Like they thought of everything on how to make things feel real in a way. Like, okay, if we're going to do this CG to make it seem like everything's getting blown out, we also have to do it blowing in. So they had to like think about their budget and how, you know, we're going to show this one shot, this one angle of where the alley is, right? And all the debris coming out and then it coming back in. That's all we got, you know, but that's all we need. You know, they didn't need to have like an entire landscape. But man, I feel like every detail was just thought out so well. And this is why, I mean, it's such a good example of why I think Hollywood is missing the boat here. They spend $200-300 million on movies, and you've got to make $500 million, you know, to make any money. Like, and then you have Godzilla Minus One, who's not only spending, you know, a fraction of that, a tenth of that,
a rounding error,
right? A tenth of that. But they're telling a great story at the same time. This should be a Hollywood learn from this kind of thing. You know, we don't need to spend $200 million on a film or $300 million on a film. Yes, it's fine. You go over budget. I understand. Like, it's really easy to spend money when you make a movie. I get it. But, you know, if you do it sparingly and you know it's about story, not about, you know, like the CG, you can do so much more. And this is a great example of that, you know?
It is. And to add to your point, I think the other thing a lot of the studios are getting wrong is they're too focused on release dates. They should be thinking about, is my story ready yet? And this is largely how it used to operate. I'm not saying there was never an era where they weren't thinking about, okay, this movie needs to be ready by December of, 1985. Like, yes, those things were probably always happening. But by and large, most films didn't go into production until, the script was ready, the story was ready, or at least close enough that, okay, we can figure out some of these details along the way. But you always went in with a game plan. And now they have release schedules probably for the next 6 years, if not more, in some of these studios. And it's more about hitting those targets than making sure your story is ready. And that's the whole, cart before the horse idea. It's like, okay, you can't do that, right? I don't know if the Canard airplane will actually work, but generally you don't want to be propelling yourself from behind. You want to pull yourself from the front, and they're just not doing that. They're just thinking too much about the one lever we have, where, okay, if the audience is Godzilla and we're trying to make sure we get the audience good, it's got to be bombs and bullets. It's like, no, you got to use your mind. Like, and their only lever is money. Like, just throw more money bombs at the audience. And do we really want to make a lot of money? Well, then you got to spend a lot of money. And it's just, this is the executive approach to creativity. And at the end of the day, you really need artists. And there's no nice algorithm that's going to help you create. It doesn't matter how sophisticated, it is, whether that's some AI model or some Netflix engineered thing that tells you audiences really like this, and this. It's like, man, at the end of the day, you need humans who understand humans in order to tell a human story. Because we don't mind all the time. They probably saved so much budget in this movie with all the time Godzilla isn't on screen, right? And those are the moments that we really love the most. And it's just harmony. It's allowing an audience to care about the characters so that when Godzilla finally shows up, the budget is well spent. And you can pour more of the budget in those, 4 scenes than, you would in 30 scenes in a 2-hour movie. Like, it's just a smarter use of budget through better storytelling that allows you to maximize everything the audience is actually there for. They think they're showing up for a Godzilla movie, and what they're actually wanting is the thing that they're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you, tell us a good story that just happens to have Godzilla. Audiences are never going to think that way. We don't know that, like, largely. It's not until you give it to them that they realize that's really what I wanted, was a story about people that happens to have monsters in it. But they don't know that. You have to understand psychology of people before you can deliver that experience.
Great
so well
point,
done,
man.
Creator.
Like I said before, the story of the engineers or whatever on the island, that provoking everything is so cool, and especially after, just recently watching Star Wars and stuff, and so many, people die and everything, but it's not about them, and that's fine. That's totally fine. But that makes me think about them, and it makes me think about, that they had families and everything, and what about their story and everything. And we don't get their story fully, but we get the effect of their loss, which is unheard of. That just does not happen in most movies, period, much less a Godzilla movie, where thousands, tens of thousands of people die. I mean, like when the monster first comes onto the shore, they say at the end, after the destruction, like 30,000 people die, and like 100,000 homes or something were destroyed, and all this stuff. They kind of give you the stats or whatever, but we see the massive effect on individuals there, and it's just I cannot believe that they did this on the budget that they did. And I was just thinking about this, all the shots and the scenes on boats. How expensive is that to film on boats? That has to be so expensive. And there's a lot of boat scenes here, granted, I think you're right. They saved a lot of money by using Godzilla sparingly. But yeah, anyway, I just, it's so unworldly how they saved money on this movie. I cannot believe that was their budget. This seems like $100 million movie to me.
Oh, minimum. Like, I mean, if you think of the creator being 85 million, and they originally thought that needed to be like 150, 180, something like that. And it's just like, what would they have said if you'd laid out this plan? They would have been like, this is easily, a $200 million movie. And they're like, we got a plan.
I mean, what is that plan? I would like to see that plan. Who is the producer on this movie? Because that producer deserves an Oscar too.
They kidnapped 1,000 VFX artists, and they're being held hostage.
Go. Yeah. VFX sweatshop.
Yeah, that's just incredible. So talking about Godzilla, though, like, it is such a satisfying story, and I'm just really impressed with the overall arc of this thing, because you've mentioned the utility of actually caring about characters that we never know their names of. Like, genius. And so I think largely Godzilla has always been known to be this metaphor of the atomic, bomb, and post-war Japan. That's all normal. I think the other aspect of this is Godzilla as a metaphor for trauma. And I think that's largely been, pointed out, which I think is fair. I think there's a number of ways that you can probably look at the metaphor, though, of how they're using Godzilla in this film. Obviously trauma, that's, top of mind. But also, like, I think it's just a metaphor for war itself. And that one I really enjoy, because you cannot destroy war. I think you can destroy, trauma. Like, there's scars there for sure, but you can get over trauma. You can move beyond trauma, and live a whole happy life. And I think that's kind of where the movie ends, with him, healing and moving on with his life. But war can never be destroyed. And in fact, the more you try to engage in war, the bigger it gets. And I think that's why I prefer that as my favorite metaphor for Godzilla so far, is because that's when he grows, is when you attack him, right? Like he had his teenage years where he was smaller. And then it's whenever he goes to Bikini Island, right? Bikini Atoll. And they nuke him there. And that's when he really grows. That's when he really starts gaining his power. The more you engage him in violence, the more he just grows in stature and violence himself. In fact, even whenever we meet him, how do you do, Godzilla? He shows up on the island and he attacks the spotlight, like someone, that's the guy he goes after. And then after that, he's just kind of stalking. And he's not attacking anything or anyone. It's not until they open fire on him, and that's when he goes and attacks all those guys who are trying to defend themselves effectively. And then he kills them, but he doesn't kill the only two people who don't pick up a gun. And I think there's probably something there to be said for that. And throughout the movie, at a certain point, war sweeps everyone. Like if you engage in enough war, it just, no one's left unspared. And that's when he starts attacking mainland Japan. Like he starts going after Tokyo, Shinza. I don't know if these are communities or actual towns. I'm not familiar enough with, Japan. My times there as a child, no. And so I think there's like a really wonderful metaphor there that's being used for Godzilla. I'll run through some of my notes, and I don't know if you still have notes, but if so, I absolutely want to hear more of those. Okay. So trauma and war, Godzilla metaphor, Odo Island, which is nice. He lands and they find out, oh, you're a kamikaze pilot. And Tachibana doesn't say anything, but he implies it. He's like, oh, I took a close look and there's nothing wrong with your plane. He's like, oh. And he kind of just limps away. But one of those mechanics who end up dying, he walks over. And what does this guy say? I'm on your side. We need more people like you. Why obey an order to die honorably when the outcome is already clear? This guy isn't judging him for what he did. And this whole opening scene is just one simple metaphor for what this guy didn't do on his mission. So they're drawing a very clear parallel between his job as a kamikaze pilot and then being asked to do it again. Tachibana tells him to do it again, and he doesn't. Like he tries, he gets in the plane, and ultimately he just can't do it, and he gets out. Like that's literally the opening scene times 2. They do this thing twice, and then we cut away. He goes back to his home, and I don't know if that's his sister or a close friend or just a neighbor. But we start to understand because, then you cut to the burial scene of Tachibana burying all the mechanics. And he's like, you guys didn't deserve this. Then he sees Koichi and he's like, this is your fault, blah, blah, blah. And he goes home immediately and has whatever his sister or, whoever she was to him relationally, she's giving him grief too. She's like, this is your fault. If y'all had done your duty. That's a really fascinating aspect because then he immediately goes and finds one of her letters where she tells him, just come home alive. It's like, what is the message here? I don't know what's right to do with my life. And he's crushed by it. And that guy on the ship gave him those photos. And what does he do? He holds on to him. And that's him for the rest of the film, trying his hardest. Oh, how do I get over that? It's my fault. Everything's my fault. Cool. So, fast forward to the final plan. Godzilla's been running roughshod over everyone. He's killed Noriko. And now Noda, Doc, has a plan. We're gonna get this guy. And they gather together, and they're going to kill it with the power of the sea, right? We're going to sink it with science, float it, and then to decompress it. If it still doesn't die at the bottom, we'll float it, and decompression will kill it. And it's beautiful. And I love this whole sequence. I'm sorry, this is my own little personal stakes in this movie, is it's really satisfying to see the power of citizens coming together and not relying on the government. This is all kinds of Wes written all over it. They had me at hello. And it's so wonderful. We can't rely on the governments. And it's governments, by the way. And that's why I think this is a metaphor for war and not America. Because America isn't stepping up either. And it's getting its own ass handed to it. Japan's army is getting handed. And so they're like, we can't rely on governments. We have to do it ourselves. This is entirely voluntary. That's so cool. And some people do leave, and no one shames them. But the rest stay. That's such a beautiful way the world should work. And my hope is someday it will. We're not there yet. And I understand it can't be that way tomorrow. But maybe, the day after that, maybe. And I love it because as that whole scene progresses and they're building this plan, someone asks, does this mean certain death? Then it certainly beats wartime, and everyone kind of has a laugh at that. It's like, you know what? If we're not absolutely going to die, the odds are already better.
That's true.
And
That's true.
The night before they're all going to go face Godzilla, Noda, Doc says, go spend time with your families. And someone looks up like, freaking A. You mean be prepared? Like they're all trying not to say the thing that this is death. We're all going out to our death tomorrow. And he says, and this is such a wonderful monologue, he says, this country has treated life far too cheaply. Poorly armored tanks, poor supply chains, resulting in half of all deaths from starvation and disease. Fight planes built without ejection seats, and finally, kamikaze suicide attacks. This time, I take pride in a citizen-led effort that sacrifices no lives at all. This battle is not one waged with death, but a battle to live for the future. Wow. And what's so cool about this whole story is, yes, they execute the plan without any deaths, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But they built it in such a way that you're glad that no one dies at the end. Like, how many of these films that, it's about the guy flying the bomb into the monster, and he sacrifices his life for the greater good. And there is, to your point, there is something beautiful about that when it needs to be done. For sure, no one's going to question that. Okay. That's the story of so many war heroes, sacrificing for their brothers in arms in their country. And that could be any country. And that's wonderful. There's something beautiful about that. There's something so much more beautiful about not needing to do that. And I will die on that hill, maybe ironically. And so this film structured and built itself in such a way that allowed that ending to be emotionally satisfying, because you have this guy who's wrestling with the shame and the guilt of not killing himself for his country. And so it only makes sense that at the end of the film, he chooses to not do that, because emotionally we've been so geared up for him to kill himself. It's a relief valve whenever he doesn't do it. We're expecting this thing. And I think this kind of lays into the idea of like the rule of repeats, where you emotionally satisfy one thing, so that you appreciate this other thing. You give us two things, and it creates a balance in the story. And here we emotionally were so geared up and ready for this guy to die that we're so excited that he didn't. Whereas maybe if the opposite had been the case, where he was trying, to not die out of this selfishness, instead of like feeling bad about not dying. Then it's like, okay, this guy finally faced his fear of death by allowing himself to. There's a sense of scale that you can introduce through these dynamics, and here they chose to let this guy live, and built it so wonderfully through the use of a kamikaze pilot itself. That's just genius storytelling, and a way to get maybe the country, to wrestle with this whole aspect of its history. Like for us, this would be like slavery and Jim Crow, and us wrestling with those concepts. Maybe for Japan, it's good for them to wrestle with those concepts of kamikaze and the things that they were. If you go back and look at Japan's history of warfare, I'm sorry, that's some of the most brutal warfare in the history of the world. Like, you will be devastated with some of the things Japan used to do in warfare. And I'm saying that as an American. like it's, and I take no pride in our country's, wars. But my God. And so it's healthy to approach some of these subjects through metaphor and directly. And so this is such a wonderful metaphor. And the Shikishima, Koichi, flying the plane to lure Godzilla away from Japan when they lay out this plan, and now let's go execute it. Cool. He's flying, this amazing feat of technology, this plane to lure Godzilla away from Japan, and I love it. The music in this film is wonderful. At the beginning, whenever we're fast forwarding through time, it opens in like December of 1945, which is like towards the end maybe right at the end of the war, right? And then we fast forward a few months, and then all of that stuff is happening with his family. We do a montage of Akiko growing up, and that montage is beautiful. The music, like we're passing time, and it's just light guitar. So airless, there's no bass. It's just lightness. It's good times. I feel like all the bass in this film was used for Godzilla and war. Like, all that low end is really there for missiles and nuclear devastation and guns going off. And then, of course, Godzilla himself, right? The soundtrack kicks on when Godzilla shows up. Boom, boom. My God. I mean, it's dope. It's so cool. But it's also heavy. It's all this heaviness coming into the mix, and all the lightness saved for humanity and goodness. And that's just wonderful. And then you fast forward to the end of the film. He's flying this plane, and what do we hear? It's lightness. It's strings, right? Giving this sense of hope, and it's choir. It's humanity itself, breathing life into Koichi. Like, it's just beautiful use of music and tones and just pitch ranges to tell your story of one versus the other. High lightness versus deep darkness. Like, it's just constructed so thoroughly in this movie. It's outrageous. And then this is so cool because this invokes my idea of the rule of repeats, because we get into the actual execution of the plan. He lures this thing, Godzilla, into the sea, into the trench. And then we see Godzilla gearing up. We see the guys in the boat, and they're like, it's time, attaboy. And we see like the Godzilla preparing, and I love the use of his scales as like this nuclear propulsion, right? In the interior of a nuclear reactor, they use, as we learned through Chernobyl at least, the pistons and, whatever those things are called, the rods. Yeah. And here it is. It feels like that's what's happening. He's like, his own nuclear reactors at work, and he's lining it up, and we're like, oh my God, he's about to destroy these guys. And then they cut to the interior of the boat. There's no one inside. And you're like, oh, okay, we're good. And he destroys it. And that's a very satisfying, like, little setup, because now they've used misdirection. Because, okay, maybe we don't know everything to the plan. And so that creates a sense of surprise that maybe their plan could work, because there's elements at play that we still don't know about. And that is what you need to create a sense of surprise in order to give the audience a satisfying experience while still executing your game plan. And that way it feels like you're not being cheated and you got everything you wanted out of this moment without needing to sacrifice anything going wrong. And so, great. Nothing's going to go wrong with the plan. Let's see how this goes. And so he lines up his heat ray, blasts the ship, and they're executing the plan to perfection. They loop the boats around them, and they tie them up with these really cool devices that fire off Freon bubbles. They give him a bubble bath that sinks him down to the bottom of the floor. And he gets to the bottom of the floor, and it doesn't work. Okay, well, part B, let's float him, kill him with decompression. And they start floating him. Oh, and he chews through it. And now he's not decompressing the way they wanted to. That failed. Okay, well now, secret plan C, a hero to the rescue, the kid who was kicked off the mission and was told that there's no way to pull Godzilla up because he weighs too much with those two ships. What does he do? He brings in a secret plan C. And he brings all these tugboats and ships, and through the power of, cooperation, they yank Godzilla to the surface. Crap, it still doesn't work. But for a moment, you're like, finally, we're going to get to the heart of this thing. And nothing. And then silence as they realize their defeat. And I love the use of silence here because it clears out the entire audio track to leave space for, and they let it sit for 10 seconds? 15? Like, they really let you sit in the silence before you introduce the faint sound of Koichi's engine. And it fades in, and then the choir comes in. So much power. Like, oh.
Yeah.
He comes in, and he's going to need to sacrifice himself after all, right? And now, I think we all knew whenever they cut away from Tachibana showing him, we all knew, like, there was zero shock. But I love that they don't tell you anyway, because you still have to wonder. Even if you know that you know that you know, you don't actually know.
Yeah.
And great use of, like, a flashback to reveal, oh, he flies it into the thing and into Godzilla's face and ejects without letting us know he ejected. Flashback. Oh, he's safe. And then they point him into the sky. These are all cliche, derivative, tropey things. Minimum 1,000 times before we've seen it. And it still works. You know what? Play the classics sometimes. You just go with what works. And it's so beautiful. Because along the little sequence, the two people who called him a coward had to wrestle with losing him. I'm just going to call him, his sister. His sister has to come to grips with, I'm going to lose him. Because Akiko is wandering around outside and she's got like this card. And she suddenly is like, oh, I know what this means. He's going to die. I don't want him to die. Tachibana has to literally build him the device that will kill him. He has to decide, no. So cool. Everyone has to change their minds about what they previously, and that just, one brick after the other builds this device that allows us to emotionally appreciate him not dying. Cool. Great. Because there's no way for war, and I think this is why the way they kill him is the only way to kill him. There's no way to kill war from the outside. It has to be killed from within. And the only way to destroy war is to stop giving lives to it.
Wow, that should be the quote of the day. That's a great phrase.
And I think that's why, now there's I think there's a number of ways Godzilla Minus One is titled the way it is. A lot of people I've seen have said that it's because whenever post-war Japan took place, that was thought to be ground zero. Like, there was nothing left. We firebombed the stuff that we did to Japan. It was pretty heinous. Like, we firebombed so many cities. And if you read the accounts of what that meant, some people think the nuclear bomb was less destructive. Like, that's insanity. And the actual survival accounts of the firebombings, outrageous. And so the idea of Godzilla Minus One is, Japan was already at a zero. And then you introduce Godzilla. Now it's even further down. It's -1. And I think that works. That makes so much sense to me. But I also think my personal, thought is it's called Godzilla Minus One because there's only one death whenever it came down to it. Executing their plan. The only death was Godzilla itself. It was Godzilla Minus One, minus itself.
Oh, I like that.
I like that a lot because I think it plays into the idea of the metaphor for war, and that whenever they really executed and destroyed this thing, they lost no lives at the end of it. And I think that's very satisfying from a storytelling perspective, as well as a metaphoric perspective. If you want to really discuss, how to accomplish the destruction of war, then let's really talk about what that means, because it's not always strength through power, like power through strength or whatever. It's, maybe you stop participating in it in the first place. And then, if that all wasn't enough, Noriko lives. What? It's so funny because watching it, you're like, oh, I don't know that I buy that, but you know what? I'm okay with it. And I think the thing that I really love about it on analysis, not in the moment. In the moment, I'm just glad because I'm like, you know what? Koichi's been through enough. Give him some wins.
Yeah.
But I really love because her surviving could feel a little cheap, but I love that it isn't revealed until after he's made the choice to live. For a number of reasons. One, it's not used as a ploy to get him to choose life. He has to make that decision for himself.
Yeah.
But then two, I think that's a really fitting metaphor for suicide. You don't know what's out there if you die. He never would have known there was something else out there for him to live for.
Yeah. Great point. Amazing. We never actually see her die, so it's okay to me that happened. And I'm heartbroken when she died, when she quote unquote dies. So I love the fact that she's just missing in the rubble, as probably thousands of other people are as well. So that kind of like would make sense. But great point about he has to decide to live before he can find out the reason, right? Don't we all? Every day, right? I don't know why I'm here. But I'm making the decision to be here, right? And then the next day you realize, oh, that's why. Or, my kids walk in, I'm like, yep, that's why. Or, like I write a song, or like, oh, that's why, or whatever. There's a piece of joy that happens. Yep, that's why. But yeah, you're right. You'd never know. And so he has to make the decision. That's brilliant.
So good. My last little note is a cinematography note. It's very simple, but it's nice. There's a reveal that happens when he's doing the minesweeper work on the boat, and they call him out to some site, and there's that reveal of the wrecked ship. And this is such a lovely reveal for a couple of reasons. They open the shot on an aerial of these two boats, and then it slowly rotates around to reveal a much larger ship that's been absolutely destroyed. And doing it in that way provides a sense of scale for the shock factor. Because if you just open on these two boats, you get a sense of scale, but because you never revealed it, it doesn't hit home quite as hard. And so hiding the big ship at the beginning gives you a sense of like, oh yeah, these boats, there's our guys, they're sitting on the boats. Those are fairly, nicely sized boats. And then you keep moving around. You're like, crap, that's a huge, oh my God, Godzilla is massive. And it just allows time to process all of these things. The other thing that I really like is that the way that it starts that shot also starts with text on the left side of the screen before revealing the battleship on the right. And doing it that way allows our eyes to move across the entire composition, so that yes, we see the text, and now we have to see the boats, and then it just keeps moving our eyes to the right whenever the ship is revealed. And so they make sure you process that entire composition to get the impact that he's trying to get you to understand. It's just perfect. Like, what great visual storytelling that he's doing, and using every piece that he needs to use. We'll throw a thing
so
to
awesome.
orient you.
I never even thought about that.
Wonderful. Like, these are things I would not think about and that I need to be studying in order to become, like, again, this is part of why, I do this, like, is to understand what the pros are doing and try to implement these when it makes sense, into my own projects. Genius, I think.
It's amazing. The lighting is fantastic everywhere as well. Yeah. Like in the shanties where they live, it's all, kind of like muted dark corners and stuff like that, because why would there be light? Right? It's not like they have, a bunch of electricity. They have like one light hanging in the middle of the room. And so, but that might have also been we spend a lot of time in this kind of like slum or like, just underdeveloped area, not underdeveloped, but like destroyed area. And that might've been another way to save money as well. But anyway. Unbelievable what they did with the budget they had.
Unreal. And to put the final little cherry on top, I think that's also why at the very end, they don't wait till a post-credit scene. They go straight back to the ocean, and his heart is still beating. And I think that's because war never really dies. So I love it. The budget is outrageous for the result. What the actual hell? There's a lot of people, like, I don't know, committing harikiri, after watching this, like, I don't know how, I must kill myself. No, it's just unreal.
I just wish that, like, I wish for Hollywood to figure this out as well. Same. And they have a lot of all these other little things, like the deep sea fish rising. We just see a few of them at the beginning when Godzilla is small, but then we see a ton of them in the ocean when he comes up, when he's bigger. Like, they're all over the place. What a great little thing, to just show the size of him. And he, because he was there on the island at first, can tell that, whoa, there's way more here than there were before. So that, and he says it out loud, essentially, that there's way more. So that gives us another inkling of the fact that he's bigger, and not just that we notice that he's bigger, because you could look at this thing and it's gigantic at the beginning. You could look at this thing and think, wow, that's a lot bigger. But the person who experienced Godzilla at the beginning saying, oh my God, he's bigger, like, basically tells us that, yes, you are not wrong in realizing how much bigger this creature is now. So yeah, it's so awesome.
So good. Yeah, that's all I got, man. Final thoughts?
Fantastic. I mean, the way of reimagining a told story, for like, how long has Godzilla been around? Like 80 years? Longer? I don't know. Reimagining this story is just so, the way it's done is so good, and I just hope that Hollywood can take notes and is actually looking at this and thinking, okay, what can we take from this in the way that we make films? Which is so funny, because a lot of times I don't know, as Americans, we feel like we are the standard in some ways, and like the world is taking note of the way that we make films and stuff. And we, don't get me wrong, we make great movies here. I am not in any way saying that Hollywood doesn't. I think that they do. Yep. But it's at what cost, right? And I don't just mean dollars. I mean, like, there are thousands of great actors out there. We don't need to pick the same 20. You know what I mean? We don't need to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for things sometimes, just because it's a story. I see a lot of times on my feed, oh, this new Brad Pitt film, it's costing $300 million. Why? Just to see Brad Pitt on the screen? I'm over it. I've seen him on screen for the last 30 years. I'm good. He's a beautiful man. Whatever. There's somebody else out there that's as good, if not better actor. Give them a chance, right? And there's another filmmaker that can make a better story, or at least as good. Give them a chance too. I'm talking to one. You know what I mean? Like, there are plenty of other ways to make movies and even tell the same a new story with an old attitude. Like, just so good.
So good. Yeah. Well done, man. Nice. What are you going to recommend this week? What do you pair with Godzilla Minus One, Todd?
Yeah, right. Well, you kind of got to go down I guess you don't have to, but I'm going down the horror, or at least monster kind of train. I haven't seen this movie in a long time, but I remember it freaking me out a lot. So I'm going to recommend The Descent, which I think is 15 years old, 10 years old at least, whatever. I think it's older, but I remember watching it and it like freaked me out a lot. But really well made, really fun path to go down. So I'm going to recommend The Descent.
Nice. Great recommendation. I am also going to do a bit of a throwback further back. If you want another monster film, Todd's absolutely pairs well with Godzilla in its own way, and this one will pair well in its own way. And I think if you watch all three of these together, you'd have a really fun day, and a long day. But I'm gonna go with a little Kevin Bacon with Tremors.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
So good. Like, it's a throwback monster movie, and worth it. Like, I think it holds up. I watched it, I feel like, a couple of years ago. I was like, you know what? Still fun. I still enjoy it. Yeah, so go check out Tremors. Graboids, I think, is the subtitle. So Grabozoids. So yeah, check that out and stay tuned for next week. We are going to be seeing another new film, another monster movie even. It's called A Quiet Place Day One. And so we'll see what those folks are up to. We'll see how it all went down in theory, hopefully. And yeah, so stay tuned for that. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, drop us a note, leave us a review. Don't forget to subscribe. And I want to give a couple shout outs. We've had some nice comments lately. Before I forget, Joe Howells left a great comment on the episode for Furiosa, because you and I were talking about a specific moment in the film. We're like, yeah, I don't know what that was about, but and he chimes in and gives some context. He's like, I think it's about this, and it's very culturally specific. And so his comment is so cool and so worth reading. And also a shout out to Uva, who dropped a note on last week's episode for 3,000 Years of Longing. He appreciated my rant about why I think it didn't do well in the theater, which I think pairs well with everything you were just saying about Hollywood and finding new actors. Yeah, so thanks Uva for the thumbs up, buddy. Yeah, and if you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/Godzilla Minus One.
And our quote of the day today is from Bertrand Russell. War does not determine who is right, only who is left. Jesus. I mean, on so many levels.
Right?
Oh my God. What a great quote. It goes really well with the line you said earlier, which you should really write down. Hold on, let me see if I remember it. The war, what was it? War, it can only live with if you throw lives at it, or what?
Yeah, the only way to defeat war is to stop throwing lives at it.
That is a great, write that down.
Appreciate it.
Right. That is a great line. And so is this. It's just so,
It's elegant.
Yeah.
And pointed. My God.
Very, very. I don't know. I don't I don't know what I could add to that. I was sitting there thinking, what could I add to that? I really don't know.
I got nothing.
I think it's fantastic. Great way to end this. Oh, man. Well, thank you so much. I think this was a great episode, a fantastic film. If you haven't seen it, what are you doing listening to this? Go watch it immediately. Please do. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Review us. It really all helps. And if there's a film that you'd like to see us pick apart and talk about, please let us know. Who knows? Maybe we'll cover it one day. Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.